All right, we can go ahead and get started as people are continuing to join us here. I'm Ryan Evans. I'm communication specialist with the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. We want to welcome you and thank you for joining us on another in our Thursday webinar series. We do these most Thursdays here at noon Central Time, and you can always find an updated schedule as well as recordings of every webinar we've done on our center's website at that's cap.unl.edu/webinars. We'll have this recording posted probably later this afternoon. So make sure you check that out if you want to revisit anything or share it with somebody or find other resources from our webinar series there as well. And today we are looking at the very important topic of financial record keeping for farm and ranch businesses. And we're going to be focusing a little more on some of the basics and foundational things because it is such an important part of a successful farm and ranch business. And accurate, up-to-date records help producers understand true costs of production, track income and expenses, and make more informed management decisions. This webinar will go over, like I said, the basics of record keeping and discuss how that information can be used to make management decisions. We definitely welcome any questions you have to be put into the chat or the Q&A as we go, and we will get to those at the end. And I would definitely encourage you to take advantage of the time we have today because we are glad to be joined by one of our great experts, Shannon Sand, who is an extension educator and agricultural economist with the Center for Ag Profitability, located in North Platte. And Shannon, I want to thank you for coming back here to present the webinar today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me, Ryan. I appreciate it. Well, like Ryan said, we're just going to talk about the basics. So I do want to stress, though, the basics of record keeping is a lot. And since this webinar is only an hour long, we're really kind of hitting what I will call, and this is, since this is my webinar. This is like the broad, what I consider the broad overview of it or the broad points of it. So we're painting in broad strokes here. So if it's not specific enough for you, please feel free to reach out to me via email or you can give me a call. My office phone number is 308-696-6733, and I'll do my best to help narrow down whatever your question is and figure out an answer for it, or at least find you the right person. So we're going to kind of do again broad overview. What are the purposes of financial records? Basic records that are needed, how to use that information to make decisions, and then additional resources. So, I'm going ahead of myself here today. Why record keeping matters? So, it supports management decisions. It's basically an essential for cost of production and enterprise analysis. And if you're growing anything nowadays, you know that cost of production is really important in determining what your break-even values are. And again, depending on your commodity or crop that you're growing right now, really important. It's also required for taxes, loans, and general compliance, depending on your industry. It's also, again, really the big thing is, at least again, from my perspective, my background's, economics and stuff. So it's foundation for understanding profitability. So that's a big one. So again, some additional reasons. I'm going to hammer home the IRS one because that's the one that most people are worried about, quite frankly. So it's generally this is that farmer's tax guide. Now this is the publication 225, which most people are familiar with or have a general idea of. It's what's called the farmer's tax guide. But if you fall under any format of agriculture, whether you do apiary, you have bees or aquaculture or flowers or corn and beans, cattle, orchard crops, you fall under this farmer's tax guide. So that's a big one. Again, so a lot of those records, people, especially small businesses like us, most of the time, really want to keep those records for the IRS partially. So it's that summary of business transactions. It's documentation, basically, again, to support those transactions did happen, how they happened, when they happened, how much occurred at those. And then again, documentation regarding assets. Some other reasons you may want to keep those are things like cash flows, debt to equity ratios, asset valuations. So I thought I found this picture and I thought it was pretty decent. So what do most people struggle with? Because record keeping is It can be a struggle for some folks, especially depending on your level of detail orientedness, is the word I'm going to use, but also just your general personality. Record keeping for some folks, just not fun, but we all know, again, we have businesses, it's really important. So, what do most people struggle with? Oftentimes, we're struggling with really staying organized. That's a big one. It can be very hard. If you saw my desk, you'd see it's entirely covered in papers right now, so I probably fall under this one a little bit. But another one is if you're out in the field a good portion of the year, sometimes it's really hard to keep up with, right? Keeping up with it throughout the year. We might be really good when it's wintertime and we're in the house, so we can catch up and do some of that. But again, keeping up with our records throughout the year, sometimes it can be a struggle, although we do have applications. We do have different kinds of software. We have pen and paper, all kinds of things that are set up now to really help us kind of achieve and continue keeping our records throughout the year. It makes it a little easier. There's some automation available for some of it. Choosing a software, that can be confusing as all get out. There's all kinds of software out there. Most of the time, what you hear is Quicken or QuickBooks, but there's Easy Farm, there's Red Wing, there's tons and tons of software out. I only named a few. So, again, if you go the software route, choosing a software that's right for you is really important. And also, at that point, I would say talk to whoever your accountant and or bookkeeper is or tax preparer, because sometimes they have a preference. So, again, having those conversations can be really important in terms of, picking the software that's right for your operation. And again, preparing for tax season. There we go. So, what to record? So, there are two broad categories you need to record. There's financial records and then there's production records, right? And under financial records, we have things like income, expenses, inventory, loans, and assets. These really help create accurate financial statements. Again, kind of mentioned a little earlier. And then production records are going to include things like crop inputs, yields, livestock numbers, grazing days, feed usage, and more. When you combine the financial and production data, you get a lot of powerful insights into what's profitable, what isn't, and where some potential opportunities may lie. So you can use the combination of the financial and production records to create and do things like enterprise analysis, and get an idea of if you're thinking about either adding on to the enterprise or creating a new enterprise. It can be very helpful. All right, cash versus accrual accounting. I'm going to do my best to explain this one, but I am going to say this can be a very, very confusing topic. So don't be upset if you don't necessarily understand the difference. Most farms and ranches use cash accounting because it's simple and accepted for tax purposes. But for management, accrual accounting is often more useful. So, cash accounting tells you what happened in your checkbook, accrual accounting tells you what really happened in your business. So, as an example, if you prepaid your fertilizer in December, cash records will show a large expense, even though the expense is tied to next year's production. Accrual accounting would correct for that. Both systems matter, but it's really important to understand the difference. So, again, cash is when, or yeah, cash accounting is when cash moves. Accrual is when it's earned or incurred or happens. So, building your record keeping system, again, before you choose any tool, take a moment, define your goals. What are they? Is it for taxes? Again, a lot of people I speak to, that's it, and that's okay. Is it for management? Is it for leaders? Are you trying to improve your tax preparation? Are you wanting to work with a different lender? Because they may again have different requirements for your record keepings. Um, are you trying to have a better understanding of your enterprise or your whole system? Once you know the purpose, create or update your chart of accounts as appropriate. And then these are the categories that you use to organize your income and expenses. Then you want to kind of decide how you'll keep your records and how often. Again, depending on your operation and depending on how much time you have available to devote to that may change. You could have weekly routines or monthly routines. Or I we'll talk about it a little later in a minute here. There are some people that do it just once a year, but I would say that's the hardest one to do because oftentimes that involves, and there is nothing wrong with what I call the shoebox or the pizza box method, but it's much easier if you can get into a habit and do it once a week or once a month. So you have that date set aside. Maybe it's the last day of the month where you're adding in all the receipts and getting everything all categorized. So, but have that time set aside where you're paying yourself and you're taking care of yourself and you're getting it done. So again, build your record keeping system is really important. But it's also really important to again build that routine, build that habit of keeping those records and updating those records after you have the system figured out. There are lots of ways to keep track of financial records. Again, we've talked about things like QuickBooks. Specifically, it has an ag option tag, which can help populate some categories, but depending on your operation, you're going to have to create new ones. So it just depends. There's things like Quicken. It's also a potential to use in order to keep track of your financial records. Both have their pros and cons. There's also the old school Excel sheet or Google Sheets. It's another way to, again, keep track of your records. There's also the old school of like pen and paper, which is great. It works. It's helpful as long as you have file storage and file space. It's not a bad option. And then as I like to say, there's also the really old school method, which some of us have, which is the shoebox with receipts. So a good record keeping system is the one you will actually use. Again, whether that's a software, an application on your phone, pen and paper that you keep in your pocket, or if you keep, your receipts in your glove box and you take them out once a month and you file them. Whatever works for you is what works, right? So that's the system you should use. Some producers really prefer paper because it's simple, familiar, easy to do. Others really like spreadsheets because they're flexible and customizable and you can do all kinds of things in there, right? Again, some people prefer just a software where they can create categories and like label things that are for their Schedule F. So it auto populates when it's that time of year. There's all kinds of cloud-based platforms out there. Some of them offer automation, easier reporting, and integration with your bank accounts if you want to do that. There's no single right answer. The key is going to be really choosing a system that fits your operation and your comfort level. That's really, really the biggest thing with these. Again, the paper, simple, but can be a little limited. Spreadsheets, flexible and customizable at times. That software, Quicken, QuickBooks, the Easy Farm. I'm forgetting the one. I just heard one the other day. Red Wing and some of the others. There's a bunch of them. They have automates entries, categorizations, and reporting. And can again, you've got lots of options out there depending on what you're wanting to do. So again, here's just an example of Quicken. I'm not telling you one way or the other to go with any of these, by the way. But some people really like it because you can do it on your computer, but you can also do it on your phone if you've got signal somewhere. So, again, QuickBooks kind of similar. They now have phone options as well, or phone applications, I should say. So, some people really prefer that. But whatever works for you and whatever you can keep track of and keep up with, that's going to be the best option for you. Again, whether that's just pen and paper or what. However, most people nowadays use some format of digital record. So I am going to focus on that a little bit here. So the best practices for digital records, if you're using them, is to start by keeping categories consistent. So once you define and decide those, unless you're changing systems, hopefully you can just keep those. You want to be consistent. That's really the most common issue that's seen is, and I am sometimes guilty of this as well myself, right? So sometimes we categorize corn and sometimes it's, even though it's just corn seed, and sometimes we categorize it as something else. I'm just saying it happens to us all. So again, be consistent. So expenses being categorized differently each month can make it really hard to reconcile. You want to also reconcile your accounts monthly so you can catch errors. Again, if you're set aside that time, either weekly or monthly, to make sure you're putting in your stuff, but hopefully it's monthly at least, so you can sit down, spend that day putting all those records in, categorizing them up, and then going through and reconciling them with your statements. So you can catch errors early and kind of, again, figure out what's going on. Attach receipts, me and words today. Attach receipts and invoices digitally if you can. This can help protect during audits and improve accuracy. You still want to keep physical copies just in case. Again, so the file cabinet method at times, depending on the type of audit from the IRS and or the USDA, you may want to keep physical copies as well. I would not get rid of physical copies. I believe the IRS look back is 3 to 5 years, depending on where you're at. And finally, you want to make sure your data is backed up. Cloud systems usually do this automatically, but if you're using a desktop software, you might want to schedule regular backups. But to be fair, even if I'm using cloud software, I will back up physically and have it stored in a safe location. I do not have it here, but I have one of those. I don't know if anyone else has seen it, but you can get them on Amazon. Uh, and it is a waterproof, heat proof. Maybe heat proof is not the word, but it goes up to a very high temperature. Basically, it's a storage bag. It's not an actual safe, but you can store your important like files and or paperwork. So for my records and stuff, I keep basically a heat proof or as high a temperature as I could find it proof SSD, which is a solid state drive, um, backed up and in there, which maybe I should not have shared this on here, but I think it's important. I think you should have it backed up to the cloud on your physical computer, as well as, again, a backup that you can have somewhere that is hopefully waterproof to some extent and or heat proof. So again, make sure you're backing that up pretty regularly. I know it's one more thing we all got to think about, but it is really important because in the digital age, sometimes things happen. So, production records are really important. A lot of people are pretty decent about keeping production records, but I just want to really hammer home those production and financial records really do go together. Okay. Production records really help you understand your efficiency. How much feed does your enterprise use? How many grazing days are available? Which field performs better and why? So we can, again, make notes of some of this stuff in our records. Oftentimes, at least for these production records, my family, again, generally keeps like a little notebook and a little calendar, and everything gets transferred over, and then it gets copied over to and eventually, generally, an Excel sheet of some format. Again, that's how it works for my family, but that's what works best for them. That's not necessarily what's going to work best for everyone else. But those projection records are really important. Again, they help us figure out which area performs better and why. Maybe it gets more rain there. Maybe it's just better soil. Who knows? This information is really essential, though, for calculating cost of production, and it's a core piece of budgeting and enterprise analysis. So within UNL, and particularly the Center for Ag Profitability, we have the Ag Budget Calculator, which does enterprise budgets and analysis. And you can kind of pop all this stuff in there and create your own enterprise budget, see your break-even values, which is really nice. So, um, yeah. So again, being able to have production records so you can pop it into different analyses tools. And again, if you're wanting to evaluate if you're potentially making changes, maybe you're looking at buying a new combine, maybe you're looking at building a new or replacing some fence or building a new barn or, whatever, you can again do that in these enterprise budgets, but you can't, well, you could, I guess. But having those production records so you have ideas of what's actually been produced is really helpful to be able to, again, create these budgets and analyses. So, um, if you want to evaluate switching different hybrids, adjusting stocking rates, or expanding a cow-calf herd, good production records really help, especially again, if it's on your operation, you're already doing it, wherever you're renting land from, really, really important. So, cost of production and enterprise budgeting, right? Production records help you understand efficiency. How much feed does an enterprise use? Again, like I said, how many grazing days are available? Which field is performing better? It'll link things like your budgets to your profitability. It's really the importance of separating enterprises, right? So again, if you have a cow-calf operation versus you raise replacement heifer and you raise replacement heifers, those are technically two different operations. Or if you do backgrounding or stocking or seed stock, any of that's again, those are technically all separate enterprises. So cost of production and enterprise budgeting are really helpful if you're looking to add or make changes or anything like that. So again, and it pulls from those production records that we just talked about, as well as the financial ones, right? So it links the records, the budgets, and profitability. Like I talked about earlier, the importance of separating out those enterprises. And I'm going to plug again the Ag Budget Calculator because it does enterprise budgeting beautifully for both cattle and crops. And hopefully soon, in the next 6 months or so, we're currently beta testing. Again, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to, but specialty crops will be out. So options, but an example might be something like we're looking at again cow calf versus backgrounding versus or growing corn versus soybeans versus wheat versus I mean so many options out there. So like I said, using that record keeping data to update budgets is really helpful, especially again when we're considering adding a new enterprise or changing our current enterprise, if we're expanding our cow calf operation, anything like that. This information is super essential for calculating cost of production and really, really important. So if you want to evaluate those changes, again, having this is just super, super powerful in terms of evaluating. I did put this slide in here. So the egg budget calculator, if you want to try playing with it, you may most certainly may. Glennis McClure, who's the one who's the lead on it, she does, I think, monthly or quarterly, like kind of online Q&A sessions. So if you have questions and you're trying to figure things out, she's really good about going through it with people. So again, now that we have, again, broad strokes, production and financial records, and from those we can create our enterprise budgets, our cash flows, our income statements, our balance sheets, all of those things can be created from these records. So here are some records or reports, I shouldn't say records, but reports that a producer may want to generate, right? Like I said, you might want to generate the balance sheet, right? You might want to look at your income statement, or sometimes called your profit and loss statement, your cash flow, which again tells you, are we able to pay our bills currently in this year and time? Enterprise cost summaries. And then this I pulled from the Center for Farm Financial Management, this lovely sheet here, and some key ratios, which are your liquidity, right? How liquid, your solvency, and your repayment capacity. So these are some example key ratios. Depending on your lender, they're going to look at different things. So the other thing I would say is, especially depending on who you're gearing your records for, aside from yourself, you might want to ask again your lender what their specific ratios they're looking at. But most of them look at some sort of liquidity, some sort of solvency, and then repayment capacity. Can I repay these debts, right? So, records for compliance. Again, I mean, we keep a lot of records in agriculture if you really think about this. And I mean, yeah. Agriculture has several record keeping requirements beyond taxes and finances. So, pesticides, you need accurate application records. If you manage manure or nutrients, you records are essential for compliance and crop planning. If you hire employees, and this is one that I've done a few different webinars on, labor laws require specific documentation. Insurance programs like LRP or PRF also require documentation to help support claims. A good system really makes compliance easier and protects your operation against potential risk. So, like a year-round workflow, again, is ideal. This is just an example. You don't have to do any of these, okay? I wanted to break it down into simple routines because, quite frankly, sometimes it can be very overwhelming to a lot of folks, right? So, daily, let's say we collect receipts, record any transactions, or use software to download them. Because, again, sometimes I don't know about anyone else, but I pretty much almost always have this on me. And there are a lot of softwares, and depending on your software, you may have an application where you can snap your receipt, auto categorize it, bam, boom, done. So, again, daily transactions, receipts, weekly, categorize expenses and income if you're not using automation. So you have options. If you're not comfortable using automation, don't use it because, again, you'll still have to check it over once a month or so to make sure everything's categorized correctly. But monthly, you want to reconcile your bank accounts and any credit cards. Quarterly, you want to review key reports, adjust your budgets, and evaluate your enterprise performance, right? Because our enterprises change all the time and we're in agriculture and anything can happen any day. We know this. Annually, we want a complete financial analysis for our operation. This approach hopefully will help prevent some overwhelm and spreads the work throughout the year. Again, we're just doing little tasks every day because we don't necessarily have receipts every day that we need to record. Again, it depends on the operation. Sometimes you might, but being able to just snap photos and have those and categorize those right away, it's one less thing you got to worry about. Weekly, again, double check everything, categorize and sync your downloads. And then monthly, you just reconcile your accounts, set aside that time, have that like day set aside. And then quarterly, you want to review your financials and update budgets. So, and then again, like once a year, you want to ideally get through that full financial analysis if you can, and if you've got time to get through it, work with your team. So, again, getting started in 5 steps. Again, I feel like when I talk to a lot of people, record keeping just feels overwhelming. So, I tried to come up with 5 simple steps to really get you started. Gather what you already have: receipts, statements, spreadsheets, whatever documentation you've got. Choose or update your system, right? Whether you're keeping it on paper, whether you're doing Excel or Google, or a software of some sort like a Quicken or a QuickBooks or an Easy Farm or Red Wing or what have you. Set up or review your chart of accounts, right? So again, this requires a little setup. You got a little time. You got to get it done. Maybe it's winter time, it's cold. We're not going outside as much. So you can set up your chart of accounts. You can get that done, get that figured out. Talk to your accountant and your bookkeeper because they're going to have their own and they may want you set up a specific way. So again, it might cost you a little extra upfront, but it'll save you a lot of headaches down the road. And if you are like me, have the same bookkeeper, accountant for years and years, do it their way and it make them happy and saves you a little money at the end of the year because that's way less work they have to do. That's what I'll say. Um, create your backup plan. Again, are you storing it in cloud? Are you storing it on a flash drive of some sort, right? Or, are you storing it in paper? And again, hopefully you've got one of those, I say heat proof, waterproof storage bags and or fire uh, safes. So, again, have somewhere safe to store it. Commit to a monthly reconciliation schedule so you're checking your bank statements and any credit cards you use for work. Those little steps, again, will build consistency. And I know, again, on the upfront, we're spending a little extra time, but doing that, it really does make life easy. So, because once you have that system down and established and that methodology, it's much easier to keep up with long term and be consistent. So I just wanted to include this because the Center for Ag Profitability has quite a few tools and resources. We have an online course called Know Your Numbers, Know Your Options that digs a little deeper into finance and record keeping. There is the Egg Budget Calculator, which is free, called the ABC. And again, Glennis McClure is the one in charge of that, and she is amazing. If you have questions, I would reach out to her, or you can email me, and we'll figure out a time that works for y'all to connect. But that's a good one if you're looking at trying to do enterprise budget and analysis and create break evens. Quicken for Farm and Ranch online program as well as QuickBooks are offered through, I believe, CAP on, is it Canvas? But we'll have that linked in the show notes somewhere or the description somewhere in here. So, but yeah, so there are a bunch of different tools and resources available. So check that out. And with that, I am pretty much done. And I thought this little pig was very cute. So
You're not wrong.
I thought the pig was very, very cute. So, like I said, I was very broad strokes today. So if you have specific questions, feel free to ask those. And if not, you are more than welcome to, again, get a hold of me.
Perfect. Thanks, Shannon. And you do see Shannon's contact information on the screen there. If
Yes.
anything comes to mind, you might want to save that and you can get in touch with her after this. But we definitely, again, do invite questions right now. We have plenty of time if we need to
Yeah.
hang on for a little bit. And I did put the link to find the courses that you talked about, the online
Oh, thank you.
courses for Quicken. And we have, I think, 5 or 6 of those we offer through the Center for Ag Profitability
Oh,
that
okay.
might be useful to people. So that link is in the chat. One question here, Shannon, can you go over income statement versus cash flow statement?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I really wanted to pull from Jessica Grosskopf. She has a lovely, let me turn this off, a visual guide of that. So the cash flow, though, is literally your cash inflows and outflows versus the income statement looks at your profit and loss. I kind of look at it like cash flows are generally on a monthly basis. The income statement is generally on an annual basis. Does that make sense? Can I see the question in here? Yeah. So the cash flow shows your cash inflows and outflows. So I really enjoy cash flows for budgeting and planning because you can do like a projected or a cash flow budget. And what that will do is basically tell you when you think your money, when are your insurance payments due, when's your seed and your feed and your fertilizer and your fuel generally due. That one's nice. The income statement is a profitability statement. Basically, it's a profit and loss. So am I making money or am I not making money right now? So
All right, thank you, Shannon. Good question. We definitely welcome any other questions here in the chat or the Q&A. Again, we've got some time
yeah.
to hang on. If anybody wants to put those in, we'll wait for a couple of minutes here. If you've got what you need today, then as you exit, then please take a look at the brief survey you'll be presented with when we close out of Zoom. It'll just ask you how today's webinar went for you and any ideas you have for future webinars we can do for the Center for Ag Profitability so we can be as helpful as possible.
Mhm.
So again, you can type those questions in the chat or the Q&A. Well, I don't see anything else right now. So, again, please do get in touch with us or Shannon if anything comes to mind after you leave today. But we definitely want to thank you for joining us for another Center for Ag Profitability webinar. And we'll be back in 2 weeks as we look at some issues surrounding transition planning and bringing the next generation back to the ranch specifically, as Jessica Grosskopf will present her Returning to the Ranch webinar on December 4th. For next week, we hope everybody has a very happy Thanksgiving and you get to spend some good time with family, friends, or however you like to do it. And Shannon Sand, thank you again so much for the presentation today. We hope everybody has a great afternoon.